The Arab Spring has produced many momentous moments in world history. But if you think back over the past year and a half of the revolutions, they haven't produced photographs that are iconic. Iconic photographs in the way that there have been iconic photographs of momentous world events from the 20th century. Particularly, you would think of the images of the lone protester in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square, or the young woman running away from a napalm bombing in Vietnam. We live in a 24-hour news culture, in an environment where people have cell phones with cameras, where the idea of one singular image, one ubiquitous image, is almost impossible to imagine. The best example of this from recent times is the attacks of September 11, 2001 in New York. Most people have an idea of various moments on that morning. The first plane hitting the tower, the second plane, the towers collapsing, perhaps the towers in flames. But there isn't one iconic image. It is a series of images. It is an event around which a whole series of images have been built. The best way to think about this is to look at the newspapers from the day after September 11th, and you see that almost all the newspapers went with a very similar image, and that was the image the moment the fireball from the second plane exploded in the second tower. But if you look closely at those images, you see that they're not the same image. They are merely the same fragments, but taken from different angles, taken from different buildings. So it tells you that the way we understand images today is not of a singular moment in time, but of a series of moments taken around the actual event. That's also the case with the Arab Spring. If you think back over the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt and Libya and Yemen, you don't find that there is one image that reminds us of that time. It is more a series of images and images around a particular event. So in Egypt, the most famous one would, of course, be Tahrir Square, full of these crowds calling for Mubarak to go. But there isn't one image of Tahrir. It's a series of different images, different angles, but all of the same events of this mass gathering of people calling for this dictator to go. Even in Libya, if you think of the months of fighting, there isn't one image that stands out. Perhaps because it went viral, there's that rather amusing image of a brave man playing the guitar while around him the rebels are fighting Gaddafi's troops. And you could think perhaps of the final image of Gaddafi captured on a grainy mobile phone just moments after he was killed. Indeed, there are no verified images of the most singular moment of the Arab Spring, the moment when Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian man who set himself on fire, sparked off the whole region. There are no images of that moment that exist. And there are other events that are momentous, but not because of the images, but because of what they represent. Take, for example, the image of Mubarak being brought into court to face trial by his own people. This was a momentous event. Someone who has lived in Egypt and spent a lot of time in the Middle East and seen the effect of the repression of these dictatorships, the idea that here was the leader of the Arab world's largest country, toppled by his own people and then tried by his own people, was absolutely momentous and very moving. But the images themselves are not that interesting. It is what they represent. The lack of a single defining image of the Arab Spring tells you a lot about how we consume media in this new world. But it also tells you much about the Arab uprisings themselves, about this astonishing awakening of human potential, calling for freedom, calling for dignity all across the Arab world. Something that, although it has left no iconic images, is iconic in and of itself.